Why is it that some people won't back down? What makes them so dangerous? Keep watching and we'll find out. Number one, the guy that's got nothing to lose won't back down. And why would he? Because at the end of the day, he doesn't care. Now, this could be the guy that's down and out. They have some sort of emotional turmoil. It means that they don't care about their own personal safety. And when someone doesn't care about their own personal safety, they're a risk to you. If they don't care about their own life, then they're not going to care about yours. Because fundamentally, people are egotistical. If the person doesn't care about the consequences of going to prison, losing their freedom, or even their life, then that's someone that's potentially not going to back down. That person is dangerous. Now, it may not be their intention to hurt you, but they've got nothing to lose. The irony is, for some people, if you have nothing to lose, that's a motivator. What are the telltale signs of this type of behavior? Is it craziness in their eyes? Is it their persistence? Is it the way that they carry themselves? Is it their demeanor? Well, it's difficult to tell when you meet a stranger whether they have nothing to lose. But when you encounter someone for the first time, very difficult to know whether that person has nothing to lose. And the problem here is drawing assumptions. On the one hand, you can look at someone and say that the guy is dressed badly. He's got holes in his clothes, holes in his shoes even. But that doesn't necessarily mean that this person has got nothing to lose. Ultimately, it's that guy who doesn't care about going to prison. Maybe they've already been there. Maybe they don't have a social structure behind them. Either way, this person's dangerous because they don't care. And that's a mindset that's hard to see. Body language doesn't give that away. Number two, maybe this guy doesn't back down because there's a high degree of experience of violence that you don't have. Violence is a spectrum. What it means for one person or one culture is very different for another person in another culture. And you can say that a young lad who's growing up in a shanty town in South Africa, their degree of exposure to violence is going to be completely different to a middle class area in London, for example. You could go as far as saying that people that have experienced violence in third world countries in which they live in societies that lack the rule of law, their experience is going to be very different. I mean, for me, cartel violence in Mexico springs to mind straight away. Now, the interesting thing is violence means different things to different people. For some people, raising your voice is violent enough. In fact, in some cultures, just getting in your personal space and being brash and loud can be perceived as being violent or in a state of conflict. People's understanding and their experience of violence will be very, very different. On the one hand, you may have a guy that served time in prison. His experience of violence is going to be very, very different to someone that's fought in a ring, for example, in a controlled violence situation. Likewise, you could have someone that's served in the military and seen many campaigns in some of the unsavory places in the world. You could have people that have operated in criminal organizations, organized criminal organizations. And their level of violence or their perception of violence is going to be very, very different. So your experience of violence dictates what you're prepared to do. Now, if you combine that where you've got nothing to lose and you have a high degree of experience of violence, then you have to anticipate that this person is going to be dangerous. You see, my point is that we all have a different perception on what violent is. For some people, a push, a slap is enough. But for others, that's only the starting point. And therefore, you can't compare people's perception of violence, their experience of it more so. So what makes a person dangerous is where they sit on that spectrum. So what would you look for? What are the signs of someone's experience with violence? The obvious thing is their comfort zone. If they're comfortable in a confrontation, they're comfortable getting in your space. If they're easy with the movement, if everything is running smoothly, if they're not fazed, if they're not bothered, I mean, the obvious telltale signs is not just their emotional control, their focus and their intent, but what they're actually doing. If you've got someone who's blading off to the side and hiding their weapon hand, was quite comfortable with being in your personal space, by the way, you should never let that happen. These are all signs of someone who's experienced with violence, but knows what they're doing. I mean, don't forget, for many people, their last experience of violence was when they're in kindergarten or in the schoolyard. People's experience of violence is something that develops over time. So as you go through life, you accumulate experience of what works and what doesn't work. And therefore you behave in a certain way. So yes, you might look out for the person that's quite calm. But that said, calmness isn't always an indicator. Because the other extreme of the spectrum could be that the guy blows in your face and he's screaming and shouting. He goes into a rage. And this is the type of guy that does it often. So essentially there's two sides to this, there's two dichotomies. On the one hand, you could look for someone who's quite calm. Then on the other hand, you can look for someone who's wild, angry and aggressive, screaming and shouting in your face and meaning you harm. And this is where you have to take behaviour in its context. First of all, you have to work out who you're dealing with. Has this guy got nothing to lose? Does it look like he has a high degree of experience with violence? Is this something that they do all the time? Is this something they do for fun? Is there a reason why this person is getting in my face? Now, of course, in a real situation, it goes like that. It goes boom, super quick. You don't have time to make these assessments. So it's well worth going through an exercise of thinking about these things in advance, being aware of the type of people that you can encounter in the street. It will make the whole process of recognizing someone who's dangerous a lot easier and a lot simpler. Number 3, an emotional deficit. This is the person that has an emotional deficit. They don't recognize whether they're causing harm, discomfort, or even pain. They are oblivious to the discomfort and pain that they can cause. Someone who has an emotional deficit may not back down. They don't recognize those triggers to back down. People back down because they recognize when to say something or when to leave. There's a reason why people back down in fights, because they realize they've bitten off more than they can chew. I know that there's some people that will double down, and unfortunately it'll end badly for them. But instinctively, most of us know when to back down. We have a sixth sense of when someone's potentially dangerous to us. Now, someone that lacks empathy, that predator, if you want to call them that, it's very easy to identify because they lack the same emotional response that the average person would have. They're cold. That's the easiest way of putting it. And in that sense, it's very easy to understand if this person is dangerous and they're never going to back down. Now, some people like to refer to sociopaths or even psychopaths, but there is a scale to this type of behavior. It's not an absolute. Some people simply aren't aware of other people's emotions. In fact, some people simply lack empathy. They lack the ability to empathize with pain, discomfort, and even hurt. It doesn't register on their psyche. Now, luckily, there are signs that you can pick this up. Quite often, when someone has an emotional trigger, you'll see those micro expressions in their face. You'll see sorrow. You'll see sadness. You'll see empathy for pain. But someone that lacks that is the complete opposite. They'll be quite cold. They'll have that deadpan look. But most importantly, what you say won't register a tone. It won't make a difference. So what's the takeaway? Well, it's not the individual points that you should take on board. It's an accumulation of all the different factors. And if you think of it in its entirety, a person that has nothing to lose, that has a high degree of experience with violence and lacks empathy, is going to probably be the most dangerous person that you can face. All of these factors are about the person's mindset. It's about their capability to cause harm. And this is where most people go wrong when they're trying to understand their self-defense ability. Now, quite often in martial arts training, people put more emphasis on what they can do rather than what the other person can do. The problem is that when most people train for self-defense, they train in technique, but they're not really taking consideration of the type of person that they have to activate this technique against, the person that they're fighting. You have to understand who you're defending yourself against, and that will dictate your action and how you respond. Whether you choose to fight, whether you choose to run, or whether you choose to weaponize yourself, however you respond has to be dictated by understanding exactly the situation you're in. So learning how to fight is great in hindsight. If you don't have the understanding of what the true fight will be, you can't possibly ever be fight ready. A lot of speakers on the subject like to throw around the word psychopaths or sociopaths. And in the popular media, in films and dramas and so on, people always look at them as very special but dangerous individuals. But the point is that this behavior operates on a scale. And there's lots of people that walk around us, that occupy our personal space, that have a degree of psychopathy. And it may not be absolute to the extreme scale, but often it's enough for them to lack empathy. And that reduction of that emotional deficit can often lead to extreme danger, especially combined with the first two observations of what makes a person dangerous. Now, if you throw any type of substances into the mix, then this is going to have a further reduction on that person's deficit, their emotional deficit. And that can make them extremely dangerous. And it's something worth considering. Thanks for watching.